The Island of the Missing. Chapter 1. The Invitation. On a muffled night of summer in a bustling bar in São Paulo, 5 friends gathered to celebrate a farewell. João was moving abroad, and they decided they needed something special before their departure. Something that was recorded in their memories forever. It was then that Ricardo, the most impulsive in the group, presented a bold idea. What if we passed a weekend on an isolated island? He suggested with a shine in his eyes. I know a guy who has a house on an island on the coast. It's totally away with no cell phone signal. Only us, nature, and a good adventure. João hesitated for a moment. An isolated island seemed exaggeration, but at the same time the idea intrigued him. Besides, it was your farewell. Why not do something completely unusual? That sounds interesting, he replied. Who else stumbles? Mariana, the most reserved of the group, paused, looking at others as if he was expecting someone to say it was a crazy idea. But no one did it. Instead, Ana and Pedro, the last 2 friends, smiled and waved enthusiastically. Of course, why not? Said Ana. That's exactly what we need. And so the decision was made. The trip to the island was scheduled for the following weekend. The week passed quickly, and the group could barely contain the excitement. On Saturday morning, they met in the small quay, where a simple boat was waiting for them. The sea was calm, the sun shone hard in the sky, and the promise of an unforgettable weekend seemed to materialize every minute. Ricardo was the most excited, as always, distributing jokes and taking pictures of the group. Mariana, however, could not get rid of the sense of restlessness that accompanied her since they accepted the idea. Do you really think it's safe? She asked João as they climbed on the boat. I never heard of this island. Relax, Mari, João answered. It will be fun. We need this before we separate. Still, something in the way the horizon seemed to swallow the boat as they distanced themselves from the coast made Mariana silent for the rest of the trip. Something wasn't right, but she didn't know what. The island appeared on the horizon after about 2 hours of travel. It was a breathtaking vision, untouched, wild, with dense vegetation covering her inside. They landed on a small beach and walked to the house that was waiting for them. It was a simple but comfortable building, and it seemed perfect for what they had planned. Welcome to paradise, Ricardo exclaimed, opening his arms like the host of the island. But paradise would soon realize it was far from what they imagined. Did you like the beginning? Subscribe and share to see what will happen next. Chapter 2. The first night. The sun was beginning to put on when friends finished tidying up and explored the house. There was no electric light, but flashlights and candles were spread everywhere, which in a way only increased the adventure mood. They prepared a simple dinner, watered with old laughs and stories. It seemed that everything was in perfect harmony. The island was the refuge that everyone needed, a place to disconnect from the world and strengthen their friendships. However, when night finally fell on the island, a sense of restlessness began to spread. The darkness was deep and oppressive, and the sound of the waves breaking on the beach, which was once reassuring, now seemed distant, as if something was hiding in the shadows. Mariana was the first to notice. She had left the house to get more firewood to the fire when she felt a chill through her spine. Looking at the dense forest behind her, there was a feeling that something was watching. Is anyone out there? She asked aloud, her voice breaking the silence. No answer. She took a few steps toward the darkness, trying to convince herself that it was just her imagination. But then a rustle of leaves made her freeze. Mariana held the flashlight hard, illuminating the forest in front of her. Nothing. Only the trees shaking gently with the breeze. With her heart fired, she quickly returned to the house. Inside, the others still laughed, with no idea the feeling of dread that now took over her. All right, Mari? Asked João, noticing your pale face. Yes, that's fine, she lied, trying to ignore the irrational fear she felt. The night continued, and soon everyone decided it was time to bed. Each went to their respective room, and the deep silence of the island surrounded them. Ricardo was the last to turn off the lights. Before bedtime, he looked out the window to the sea. The full moon shone intensely over the water, but something more caught his attention. A figure stopped on the edge of the beach. He blinked, trying to focus better, but the figure was gone. He frowned, confused, and resolved that he should only be the reflection of the moon in the water. He lay down and shortly after he fell asleep. But that night, one of them would not wake up. Looking forward to the next chapter? Don't miss the surprising twist. share and subscribe to continue reading. Chapter 3. The Disappearance. When the sun rose the next morning, bringing a golden light that penetrated the windows of the house, the friends woke up slowly, each feeling the light exhaustion of a sleepless night. The first to realize that something was wrong was John, noticing that Ricardo, the noisiest of all, was not there to make his usual morning jokes. "Has anyone seen Ricardo?" he asked, hoping to hear his friend's animated voice responding from some corner of the house. But the silence predominated. Mariana, already restless since the night before, was the first to go out the door, looking at the beach. Your heart began to accelerate. Ricardo's absence was unusual even for him. She walked to the water, her feet sinking slightly in the sand. The sea seemed calm, but the surrounding silence was dense. "Ricardo?" she called, waiting for him to be swimming or exploring some part of the island. But his voice echoed unanswered. Little by little, all friends left the house, the restlessness growing. Pedro suggested that he may have been around alone, but something in the tone of his voice revealed that he was also worried. Wouldn't he take anything to swim? Not even a towel? Ana asked, frowning as he searched the surroundings. From that moment on, a search began. First around the house, then through the beach until they finally reached the forest. Dry branches snapped under their feet as they deepened in dense vegetation, calling Ricardo's name repeatedly. Each scream seemed to disappear in the immensity of the island, as if nature itself was conspiring to keep them in the dark. Mariana, already taken by a growing fear, stopped suddenly. "And if?" she started, but her voice failed. "What if something happened to him?" "Something like what?" Pedro asked with an attempt to calm down. "He must have only been lost. This island is large and it was probably further than it intended." However, while the group dispersed in a more determined search, the feeling that something bigger was at stake was beginning to seize them all. No sign of Ricardo. No clue from where he had gone. It was as if he simply disappeared from the face of the earth. Around noon, after without success hours, the group gathered back in the house. Everyone's countenance was of despair and exhaustion. The fear was taking over. "What are we going to do?" Ana asked the embargoed voice. "We can't stay here without knowing what happened." John, always the most rational, pondered for a moment. "We have the boat. We can go back to the continent and ask for help. This is the wisest." But before they could make a decision, a noise coming from the forest interrupted them. Leaves rustling, hasty steps, all froze, the hearts firing. Suddenly a figure came running from the woods toward the house. For a moment they thought it was Ricardo. But the figure that emerged was far from comforting. He was a man they had never seen before. Want to know who is the stranger who appeared? Share and subscribe to discover the mystery. The strange. The man was covered with dirt and his clothes were in crash, as if he had spent weeks or months in the jungle. He stopped a few meters away from his friends, panting with his eyes wide. His face showed so much fear and surprise to see other people. "Who are you?" asked John, trying to keep his voice steady, but without hiding his nervousness. The man looked around as if he was still processing their presence. "Are you in prison here?" Your voice was hoarse as if he hadn't used it for a long time. "Prisoners?" Peter repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" The man advanced a few steps and everyone moved off instinctively. Something in it conveyed a sense of danger, but also of despair. I arrived here for weeks. We were in a boat, me and some friends. An accident. We couldn't get out of the island. No one can." Mariana frowned. "What do you mean by, no one can go out? ? The man looked straight at her, her almost glazed eyes. "The island, she takes us, one by one. As you did to my friends. As you did with yours." The group was silent, his words echoing as a thinning sinister. Something on that island was wrong, very wrong. Ricardo's disappearance was not an accident or a simple carelessness. There was something more at stake. Something they could not yet understand. "Do you know where he is?" Ana asked, the trembling voice. "Ricardo, our friend. Do you know what happened to him?" The man shook his head as if the simple thought terrified him. "When they disappear, they never come back." John approached, trying to keep calm. "So how did you survive so far? If there is anything here, how is it still alive?" The stranger laughed in bitter. "I hide. I am moving. This island, she has eyes. You're always watching." The silence settled between them. Was the man crazy? Or would it be telling the truth? Mariana looked at others, the fear stamped on her faces. They didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain. The sense of security they had when they arrived on that island had completely disappeared. Now there was only the growing terror that something invisible and unknown was playing with them. "We need to get out of here," Peter whispered. But deep down everyone knew that the man might be right. The island seemed to have its own plans, and escaping it would be much harder than they thought. Are you ready to find out what is really happening on the island? Don't miss the next chapter. Share and subscribe to continue the journey. Chapter 5. The Revelation. The tension was palpable while friends tried to process the strange words. No one knew what to believe. Was he crazy, victim of prolonged isolation on the island? Or was the invisible threat he mentioned real? "We need to think calmly," said John, trying to keep control of the situation. "We can go back to the boat, get out of here and ask for help on the continent. We can't simply believe that we are in prison." The stranger shook his head, a bitter smile appearing on his lips. "I tried. The boat never comes anywhere. It's as if the island pulled us back always." Mariana, who was silent, looked at the dense forest surrounding the house. "So what do? We just wait until it's our turn?" "No, we cannot stand still," said Pedro, suddenly rising. "There has to be a logical explanation. The island is not alive. This makes no sense. Ricardo is around somewhere and we will find him." "You don't understand," interrupted the stranger, his voice now more serious. "This island, it feeds on us, and the longer we stay here, the closer it comes." The group was silent again, absorbing their words, but Pedro was decided. He took a flashlight and headed at the door. "Staying here arguing will not help. I'll look for Ricardo." John hesitated for a moment, but knew that Peter would not go back. "Let's go with you." Pedro made an affirmative gesture, and everyone except the stranger took their lanterns. Mariana threw a last suspicious look at the man, who was still at the door before following the others. The forest closed around them as they advanced. The air was heavy, damp, and the sounds of small animals at a distance made each crack of branch seemed an imminent threat. The path they had previously exploited with curiosity now seemed labyrinthine and oppressive. They walked in silence for almost an hour, calling Ricardo's name from time to time, but there was no sign of him. Nothing. Only the dark and impenetrable forest, as if hiding its secrets. "Maybe we should go back," Anna suggested, her tense voice. "This is not taking us anywhere." But before John could answer, they heard a sound. A snap like branches breaking under feet. Everyone stopped, the hearts firing. The sound came from some point ahead in the depths of the forest. "Ricardo?" Pedro called, with the flashlight pointed towards the sound. But instead of their response, a shadow crossed rapidly between the trees. Mariana released a low cry, and Pedro ran toward the shadow without thinking. "Peter, no!" John shouted, but it was too late. They followed him, running through the trees until they reached a small clearing. Pedro was standing in the center, his flashlight illuminating the floor. What he found, however, was not Ricardo. On the floor, lifeless, there was a body. But it was not from any of them. Anna gasped, covering her mouth, while Mariana could barely believe what she saw. He was a man, dressed in lame clothes that had been worn out of time. His face was partially covered by foliage and dirt, but one thing was certain. He was not recent. The body seemed to have been there for a long time, maybe weeks, maybe months. "Who is he?" asked Mariana, the voice barely coming out. Peter was silent, looking at the corpse with an expression of confusion. "He was here all the time. And we saw nothing." "What does that mean?" John questioned, trying to find logic in the situation. "Who else is on this island?" "I warned," said a voice from the trees. Everyone turned at the same time. It was the strange. He had followed them without realizing it. "There are others like us, but they disappear. As your friend." "Is he dead?" Anna asked, the voice almost inaudible. The stranger approached his body, and after a long silence he answered. "He was not the first, and it won't be the last one." Want to know who is behind these mysteries? Share and subscribe to the next chapter. Chapter 6. The Darkness. The night fell quickly as the group was returning to the house, the silence between them increasingly heavy. Finding the body had been the break point. The hopes of a rational explanation were dissipating. Something strange and evil really stared at that island. "What do we do now?" Anna asked as they gathered in the room of the house. The lanterns weakly illuminated the walls, but could not dispel the shadow of fear that involved the group. "We need to get out of here," said John, his firmer voice now, despite the desperate situation. "Let's try the boat in the morning before it's too late." "What if he said it is true?" Mariana asked, pointing to the stranger, who now remained silent, watching them. "If we really can't leave?" Peter, always the most practical, shrugged. "We need to try. We can't just wait. Perhaps the tide was against him, or maybe the boat failed. There is no other option." The stranger looked straight at Pedro, his face a mask of desolation. "You don't understand. This island makes us see what it wants. It creates illusions, manipulates our minds. Ricardo, you will never find it. He is already part of her now." The words hovered heavy in the air. John, however, was not willing to give up. He got up, determined. "Let's go out in the morning. No matter what happens, let's survive." That night, no one slept. The sound of the wind whistled by the trees outside. It seemed more a whisper, as if the island itself was trying to communicate with them. And in each one's heart, the question remained, would they be the next to disappear? When the first light of dawn broke the horizon, everyone was ready to leave. But when they arrived at the beach, a terrifying vision was waiting for them. The boat was destroyed, scattered in pieces across the sand, as if an invisible force had spent all night having fun with the only hope of escape they had. What happened?" Peter murmured, perplexed. Mariana stepped back, the panic growing inside her. "The island? It won't let us leave." And at that moment, the truth finally hit them in full force. There was no escape. Curious about the outcome of this suspense? Subscribe and share to find out the end. The last disappearance. The shock of seeing the destroyed boat left the group paralyzed. The air seemed heavier, as if the island itself was breathing around them. Anna was the first, breaking the silence, your voice barely coming out. "Are we stuck here?" John looked at the pieces of wood scattered across the beach, the panic starting to climb his throat. He turned to the stranger, his patience on the edge. "You knew. I knew all the time that it would happen, didn't you?" The man remained silent, the tired eyes of those who had already faced that despair before. "I tried to warn you, but you didn't believe it." "What now?" Pedro exploded, his voice full of anger and fear. "What do we do now?" The stranger sighed, as if the weight of the question were more than he could carry. "We cannot do anything with it. The island will take everyone one by one, just as it did with my group, just as you did to your friend." Mariana could no longer hold back her tears. "This cannot be real. It can't be true." John, although trying to keep calm, knew that what the stranger said increasingly made sense. Ricardo had disappeared without traces. The body they found in the forest. The boat destroyed. The island seemed to be playing with them, manipulating their fears and hopes. "We need to go back to the house," said John finally. "Stay together. Maybe there is another way out. We can't give up." Reluctantly, everyone agreed, even though he knew his chances were running out. They walked in silence back on the trail, with their eyes always attentive to the slightest sign of danger. The sun, which was beginning to climb into the sky, didn't seem to bring any relief. When they got home, something was wrong. The door, which had left closed, was ajar. John was the first to notice, stopping suddenly. Someone was here. Pedro slowly advanced, pushing the door carefully. Inside, the house was empty, but a strange feeling hovered in the air, as if someone or something had passed around, leaving an invisible brand. "This is getting weird and weaker," Anna whispered, looking around with nervousness. But then, before anyone could react, a deafening noise echoed through the forest around. The sound of branches breaking, something moving quickly on the trees. Everyone frozen, panic growing again. "What was that?" asked Mariana, the voice shaking. Before they could find out, the stranger, who was further back, shouted. When they turned, he was no longer there. Only the silence of the forest and the echo of its last steps. He disappeared. Peter exclaimed, his eyes wide. "What's going on?" Anna asked desperately. John knew. The island was beginning to claim its victims. "We need to get out of here now," he ordered, and everyone ran back to the clearing, not knowing where they could go. They ran until their legs burned, until the breath was missing, but it seemed that the more they ran, the more prisoners they became. So suddenly everything was quiet. The group stopped panting, looking around. The forest seemed to engage them, like a predator about to give the boat. And it was at this moment that Mariana noticed. Peter was no longer with them. "Peter?" she shouted, panic dominating her voice. "Pedro." But there was no answer. John and Anna looked around frantically, but Peter had disappeared as silently as the stranger. Now it was just three. "The island is catching us," Anna whispered, the voice full of dread. John tried to think rationally, but his mind was spinning. The island was playing with them, but why? What did she want? And why take Pedro, Ricardo, and the others? "We need to go back to the house," said John, grabbing Mariana's hand. "Stay together. It's our only chance." They came back, the three together, but deep down they knew they were at the mercy of something they couldn't understand. Each step seemed to guide them deeper into the island maze, where time and logic no longer follow the same rules. When they arrived at the house, there were no more signs that Peter or the stranger were there. Just the emptiness. Fear was unbearable. John looked at Mariana and Anna. "We cannot let the island win. There is something here we need to find out." But before they could formulate a plan, the house seemed to tremble. A deep sound, like a moan coming from the depths of the earth, echoed by the walls. Then the flashlights began to blink, and one by one they erased. The silence that followed was absolute. Mariana and Anna held desperately to each other, her hearts fired. But John, trying to keep the composure, knew the end was near. And as if the darkness itself was moving, he felt something touch his skin. When he turned, the last thing he saw was the deep, infinite void, before disappearing in the darkness of the island. He dawned again, and the island was at peace. Nothing was left of the group. Only the sound of waves breaking gently on the beach and the whisper of the wind passing through the trees. The island would continue to wait for new visitors. The end. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, like and comment on the story.